Hi, this is Seema Arora, and this is a podcast on sustainability, climate, business, ESG, tech, and the economy. In today's podcast, I'm going to talk to a very special guest. His name is Dr. Christian Butzlaff, and he is the Chief Sustainability Architect at SAP. And we are going to talk about ESG and all the ESG solutions that companies can deploy and measure their sustainability impact as well as the ESG impact. Um, Before I go formally into introducing Christian, um, I want to just take a few minutes about the landscape of sustainability and ESG. Um, and here I want to mention the fact that ESG has become essentially a part of the rubric of investing. That is, investors look for information on the environmental, social, and governance aspects of a company before they want to make decisions, financial decisions about the company. Now, there's a lot of back and forth, all right, on this in terms of, and also a little bit of politicization. But the idea that the world is looking for transparency across these three dimensions, simply because it's just not a matter of values anymore, but that these three attributes increasingly are contributing to the financial bottom line. And there's a lot more to be said on this, but in this episode, I'm really going to focus on how Christian and his team at SAP are moving the needle towards measurements and how they are developing products that help facilitate companies to measure and track their sustainability progress and therefore also impact the bottom line. So, very glad to have you, Christian. And I want to say that when I thought of doing this podcast, I immediately thought of you because of our past association and because of your work at SAP. So, just a brief introduction on Christian. He was born in Germany. He has a PhD in physics from there, and he's an early SAP employee, started in the engineering organization and materials management. And after moving to the US, he has taken many product engineering and customer facing roles at the company. But over the last 3 years, he's been part of the sustainability team at SAP and supporting the go to market activities as well as the product requirements and architecture. So, a very warm welcome. And let's start by talking about SAP and its primary role in the enterprise resource and planning software and how sustainability has naturally had a fit there. So over to you, Christian.
Thank you, Seema. And first of all, thank you very much for inviting me for this podcast. I'm really honored to be here and being able to speak about, SAP and our role to, what we say, to kind of really make the world run better and improve people's life, which is actually our overall theme and which is also, really fits very well with the topic of sustainability.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you already mentioned ESG and sustainability. What we are really looking at from SAP, where we are kind of the leading software provider in the ERP space. So many of the all of the Fortune 500 companies basically run our software somewhere to run their day-to-day business and the day-to-day business processes. Mm-hmm. So what a lot of companies look at for ESG is kind of purely from the mandatory reporting requirements, right? Starting with voluntary reporting because the market, the customers were looking at it, then kind of now moving more into the mandatory space of sustainability reporting, and that's a broad space, right? So we are not just looking into carbon footprint, which is the first thing which comes into mind, but we also look at the whole spectrum of environmental impact a company has. So whether that is water consumption, whether that is any other pollutions beyond just carbon, whether that is plastic, which we are producing, and unfortunately, which is found in the oceans, as well as microplastics. And then obviously also the social side, where we have, making sure that we don't have any forced labor in our supply chain, but also looking inside, right? So making sure that we have equal pay, that we have equal opportunity inside of our own companies, and that we have the whole governance in place. So it's a very broad spectrum, and covered by many of the now more and more upcoming regulations, and some of them becoming more mandatory. But ultimately, the way we look at it is that we really want to make sure that we are becoming more sustainable in our operations, because what we basically say is that no company becomes sustainable without their business processes becoming sustainable.
Yeah.
So that's really important for us. And since most of the business processes are running through SAP systems, I think we are uniquely positioned to really help the companies and our customers to become more sustainable, way beyond just reporting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the synergies between the fact that you're already the business kind of planning software at the enterprise level, and then to map on top of that the sustainability piece, be it again very inclusive, not just the carbon footprint, but your your partnership on the plastics, and your commitment to kind of embrace the circular economy, in the kind of the measurement side, and help companies transition to that. Could you then start off with this software as a service model, and take me through a company that is trying to have pieces of sustainability? So we can talk about the sustainability tower uh, that you guys have developed, or you can start off just by how a company can uh, go piece by piece and include the sustainability aspects. Uh, does it have to be on the cloud, uh, your cloud, or can it be integrated across? So I know, for example, you have a partnership with Google Cloud. So how does it work? I mean, as a company that is looking to embrace or adopt some of the tools that you have, just walk me through a little bit of the technology side.
Yeah, so happy to do so. So first of all, we have a modular approach, right? So because of all the different aspects, also our customers have different needs. So we have a modular approach, which allows customers to kind of start adopting piece by piece. That's kind of where also the cloud strategy helps, right? Because we are really fast to react. If we look at the some of the regulations, like the EPR schemes, which are getting introduced, there are fast changing regulatory changes, and we need to adapt to that and make sure that customers have the latest software and latest in place, so that they can be compliant. So the cloud really helps there. But the cloud also helps in many other ways. And first of all, independent of the sustainability solutions, right? Moving to the cloud for customers has a lot of benefits in terms of saving on operational costs, being able to get the latest and greatest software, not only in sustainability, also in other areas. But it also helps customers to reduce their carbon footprint, right? So moving to a carbon neutral cloud service provider really helps them also to reduce their carbon footprint from a IT operations perspective. And that's kind of where we, as SAP, move into the cloud, not only with the sustainable solutions, also with the core ERP system and ERP landscape. We do, as you mentioned, collaborate with all the big hyperscalers. So you can customers can use our own data centers, or can basically deploy our solutions on the hyperscalers, and we work very closely together with them to also provide carbon neutral services to our customers, as we do already from our own data centers across the world. So that's kind of one part of the strategy. But as I mentioned earlier, we have a modular strategy, right? So So a lot of customers who are approaching us today are really coming from a regulatory perspective, right? They see the need to move from very often Excel-based tools to which they use to create their sustainability report, which is a lot of effort, which is not auditable, cannot be assured,
Mhm.
to a kind of more stable platform where they have all the data in place, most of the data already coming from the ERP backend systems, so that they have auditable procedures, that the data can be assured and ultimately even attested, right? So very similar to financial data. That's kind of where we see, right? So that we call it like the SOXification of sustainability, where we
Mhm.
see more and more requirements there in this direction. So therefore, we have a modular approach where companies maybe start with a tool we call Sustainability Control Tower, which
Mhm.
really provides more like the holistic view of all the different sustainability aspects of a corporation, allows them to monitor them, set targets, ambitions, to really see how they become more sustainable, and ultimately also then build a consistent database for their ESG reporting, which they then might want to do not only just once a year, but maybe even on a quarterly basis, at least internally, where they can generally track progress. And then once they are there, they would actually maybe become more sophisticated, right? And would also potentially look into what is the carbon footprint of my product? Because they're getting asked for it either by their customers or by the end consumers in general.
Mhm.
And then how do I measure the carbon footprint bottom up for my product? So meaning starting with the bill of material, which they have in the ERP system, looking into what are the parts which I'm buying from which suppliers, what associated carbon footprint, collaborating with those suppliers potentially on that, but then also looking into the internal operations, the manufacturing processes, the resources used, and activities in the manufacturing process, and adding all of this together to really have a detailed view on their products footprint, right, which they can then also share with their customers. So that's kind of on the carbon side, but then obviously also integration in a lot of other topics. And, I mentioned like the social aspects on the HR side,
Mhm.
also looking into the supply chain network, right? So we have new regulations coming up in the European Union for deforestation, right? Making sure that the parts or the materials I'm buying have not been subject to deforestation. How do I make sure that I can do that if I buy bulk material? So we have solutions like Green Token we talk about, where we can really have the chain of custody tracked for these materials to assure that and to validate that that the parts I'm buying are not subject to deforestation. So a breadth of different solutions, and also mentioned carbon, plastic. So that's kind of another area. So where we have basically cover all kind of aspects of sustainability for our customers.
Okay. Wow, that's a lot of topics. So, if I may, just go back to your sustainability control tower. Is that what it's called? Yeah. So, does that have the kind of? Do you assign different roles? So, for example, the product manager, or for example, um, is this role allocated to the CEO, to the CFO, or more broadly? I mean, there's a supply chain element of it. So, kind of the supply chain person in charge. How because there are a lot of uh, points where sustainability has to be managed or improved, and obviously there are different teams that are looking at different aspects of the sustainability. So does the sustainability control tower kind of assign responsibilities to uh, you know is that like for one role and for another? How does it work? So it's kind of from the managerial standpoint, it's more usable and
Yeah,
uh,
great question. So I think there are different layers on it, right? So the target audience for the final result of the control tower kind of maybe on the one hand side, someone who is in executive management that might be in the area of the CFO. That's where sustainability
Mhm.
is located, because they are responsible for the final output the declarations, right? The disclosures
Yeah, exactly.
together, and ideally even bring this together also with the financial data, right? To come up with a integrated report which includes like the financial as well as the sustainability aspects of the corporation. So that kind of would be on the top level. But then when we break it down a little bit, then we would have different roles in the, let's say, different lines of business, right? Where we define sustainability targets, and then use the control tower to really monitor against how well am I doing against those targets. But sustainability at the end is also, everything is also about data, right? So
Yeah,
it's really be able to get the data and retrieve the data in an automated and also a testable, auditable way. So and data are coming from all kind of different areas, and they need to be valid. They might need to be validated, assured. Maybe there needs to be a sign off. So you will have roles in different lines of businesses where people are responsible for a specific set of data, making sure that they are getting collected, making sure that they have the right quality, are okay before they all get aggregated into a final report or disclosure. So you will have different roles, and you can also then set that up in these tools, right? Where you have workflows assigned to different roles, different people being responsible for different parts of it. But then ultimately, when you look at from top down, to see the overall, that's why we call it holistic reporting, right? So that you want to have the overall holistic view on sustainability that might then go up in the hierarchy and
yeah.
ultimately end up at the table on the CFO when it comes to the external disclosure.
Okay. So it's kind of like integrating sustainability in like an analytics kind of a platform, right? That's the sustainability tower.
That is on
And
the one hand side, but definitely kind of that is kind of because that is also then required, right, from a regulatory
yeah,
perspective, if I want to have my disclosures. But as I mentioned earlier, it's really important to bring back this information also into the line of business, right, into
yes,
the individual
exactly.
business. So just give you an example, right? So if I'm a procurement manager,
Hmm.
if I have to buy certain materials, and typically what I'm doing today is I'm looking into what is the price of the material, right? What is its availability, and probably also what's the quality of that supplier, right? And I want to add sustainability to it, right? Or
Yeah,
need to add sustainability to that, and that could be multiple attributes. It's not just the carbon footprint, as I said. It's
yeah,
also, is that material from that supplier, is there potential for forced labor? Is there a potential for deforestation? So I have a lot of also sustainability attributes, which
yeah,
I have to look at as a procurement manager. And this kind of information I need to bring in when I design a new product. Right, I want to make sure how can I design it to be more circular, and
yeah,
to maybe to have less plastic included. So we really want to bring back this information into the line of business, because only then we can
yeah,
really make the
yeah,
company more sustainable.
exactly. Um, yeah, so that's exactly the thinking on sustainability, is that it's not just, well, it is values for sure, but in the end, it's integrated nicely into the product and the processes. And that's when the real gains from sustainability also happen in value creation.
Exactly. So there is not so much value if we just extract data and have a system standing next to the rest of the company, being
Yeah,
basically separated from the rest of the company,
yeah,
potentially not even working on the same kind of entities.
yeah.
Then we cannot really drive change, right? So
Mhm.
therefore, this integration is key.
Okay. Uh, okay, so that's, I think, a nice kind of set of modules that you've described, and all nicely integrated within the business process. And what you're also telling me is that in the ultimate, so let's talk about a little bit about, uh, you mentioned green token. That's a supply chain tool for for sourcing of materials, and does that have blockchain? So talk a little bit about the technology that enables that um, particular module?
Yeah, so green token originally, was the use case was really tracking palm oil. That kind of
Yeah,
was the original business use case. But if you look at
correct.
it, you can look at all kind of different um, types of commodities which
Mhm.
fall under similar problems, right? So you can look into organic cotton, right? So and you might mix organic with non-organic cotton. So it's really about bulk material. It's
Yeah,
about all these different things, as well as deforestation, right?
yeah,
Making sure that what I buy is not subject to this. Yeah, so it's a network solution. It does have some blockchain technology behind it, but it's not like a public blockchain, right? It's kind of really kind of within SAP. So, and it is uses that to create the chain of custody so that we can really kind of assure that everyone kind of who puts data in there, that this cannot be manipulated,
yeah,
that we have the full view about the visibility. It has the concept of tokens. So
yeah,
we are basically assigning tokens so that we can have the mass balance. If I have bulk material from certified and non-certified materials, it basically has tokens assigned to those so that I can really track the amount of, let's say, certified materials through the supply chain and through my own manufacturing, including yield loss and things like that, to the end consumer. Yeah, technically, it's a network solution. It uses some blockchain aspects to it, and it's really kind of intended to support customers that we have big customers in the US as well who are using that, particularly also for the palm oil
hmm,
use case, which
yeah,
was the original use case. And now we expand that to have other use cases, whether it's in the fashion industry for, certified organic material, or whether it's certified recycled material use, right? A certain percentage of that, or whether it's now also in the new deforestation, support the new deforestation regulations, which are coming out of the EU.
oh, I see. Yeah, is it also being used for sourcing of like battery materials, for example, or?
So it's not a sourcing application per se. So
Okay,
you would not go there and say I'm try to find a certain material, right? So it's
yeah,
not a sourcing. It's basically that you establish the relationship with your suppliers. It can go multiple steps in your supply chain,
yeah,
um, and it works on the certificates, uses the certificates which the supply chain members are are possessing, and that which are they are filing, and they can upload that there so that they can support the claims which they make
hmm,
for sustainable material which they deliver, and then it integrates really also into your ERP backend system so that you have every kind of all the deliveries you get, all the receipts you get, and the claims associated with that you really know, this is the amount of products I bought, and they are certified, and I have also the documentation behind it.
I see. Okay, got it. Um, okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about the alignment with different disclosure frameworks. Is that kind of the um, how is that done through the products, like
Yeah,
uh, GRI or SASP, or the frameworks, the TCFT as well. Yeah,
yeah. So obviously there are a lot of different frameworks out there, right? So we have GRI. You mentioned some of them. GRI, SASP. We have the CSRD requirement in Europe. We have maybe upcoming regulations, whether that's from the SEC, which is kind of on hold there, but also in
yeah,
California, the regulations which had been signed, a few months ago.
yeah,
So, and then you also have ISSB, right? So you basically look into internet when you look at global. You
yeah,
have the regulations which are coming there. Many of them using based on TCFD for the risk part. Many of them are using then also the greenhouse gas protocol for carbon, but they also have their local flavor, right?
yes, yeah,
So you do have a broad spectrum of regulations and disclosure requirements. And if you look at any bigger corporations, website and you look at all their sustainability report, you just not find one. You will find, you find the GRI index, SASB index, and all kind of different
Yeah.
regulations, which obviously is a lot of work to create.
Yeah.
So based on that, that's why it's important to really have a good data foundation, which we use, which our control tower, use our control tower for, that you
Yeah.
really have a good data foundation, which you can use then to really basically support all the different regulations. And there's also a lot of overlap. Not everything is totally separate, but there's a lot of overlap, and these organizations work together kind of to make the disclosure burden a little bit smaller to increase this overlap. But at the end of the day, you need to have a good and secure and broad data foundation to really then from there being able to create those corresponding disclosures. That's kind of what we use the control tower for. It comes with also some. So what we also kind of focus is very much also more on the mandatory disclosure requirements, so therefore we are supporting CSRD requirements. We have a so-called startup package, right, for companies to really deploy that, looking into creating a first version in a very short time frame using the startup package for CSRD reporting. We do provide specific content for the EU taxonomy there as well. But we also collaborate with external partners like Thomson Reuters to then also really kind of drive or kind of other final disclosure documents.
Is that a recent one, right?
That's a recent one, yes.
Yeah. So you have collaborated with Thomson Reuters.
Yeah, so we collaborate with them, right, to really use the data and the data foundation which we established in the control tower, to then really extract or make the data there available for them to do that also kind of final disclosure documents. But companies could also use other tools, right? So the idea is that whether we also coming from an integrated report where we bring in finance and sustainability together into kind of one integrated report. So a company who has already a tool, whether it's SAP Disclosure Management or whether it's other tools, third-party tools which they use, Thomson Reuters being one of them potentially, right, to create their financial reporting. They would also be wanting to use the same tools to basically also integrate the sustainability aspects to it. So that's why we are, although we collaborate with specific vendors, but we also are open from an SAP perspective for any other tool to use those sustainability data, and also our own tools, obviously, to create the final reports and really bringing then the financial and the sustainable data together into kind of one integrated report.
And that would potentially go to the SAC, for example.
And that would potentially go to the SAC, or that could be in different formats, right? So we have the electronic formats in Europe where those reports might be filed electronically, or they might be in PDF documents, whatever is needed. Yeah.
Okay. So right now, given are people kind of on standby mode in the US in terms of whether they're going in to preparing themselves for disclosure requirements, or is there nevertheless, kind of interest in acquiring these tools from you?
So I would say, if you're in standby mode, that's a problem, right? You shouldn't. I mean, we do have, yes, we are waiting for the SEC regulations, but we do have, on one hand side, we have the regulations California, which is obviously, one of the biggest markets globally, even. So, so their companies should look into that if they do business in California. We do see a lot of corporations in the US who are asking us for CSRD reporting because they're subject to CSRD reporting based on their size or the fact that they have subsidiaries in Europe. So that's definitely also something to look at. Any kind of work they do in this direction will also help them, with SEC reporting, because it's not as not as broad as the CSRD reporting. For instance, CSRD requires scope 1, 2, and 3 reporting, whereas SEC currently only has scope 1 and 2 in their proposal. But beyond carbon, we also see other regulations coming up, right? So we have now extended producer responsibility regulations coming up in the US. I think with Oregon being the first early next year, and then California, Colorado following also next year, where companies will have to report on their packaging material, right, and pay fees based on the packaging material and the amount of products they sell into these states. So this is something which companies are, will have to pay for, report, and then pay the fees next year, early next year, actually. Oregon, I think, is due in May. So therefore, they really have to start collecting the data, right? Being sure that they're ready for that, so that they are able to pay the right fees, not overpay. We don't want that, right? But also avoiding any potential fines they might have to pay if they are not ready, right? So therefore, we also see interest there, right, for companies really kind of to make themselves ready for all these kind of more local, statewide regulations or international regulations. So the SEC, if they did do all these other things, right, they will be ready for the SEC, and there will then hopefully be not a lot of additional work they need to do. So I think I would advise any customer to not wait for that and really start and moving.
Yeah. And, also, I mean, in a lot of my research that I've done for many years now, the idea that even when regulations are weak, they might be stalled for a time, given the framework where, customers value environmental quality, companies tend to now compete on presenting themselves as environmentally conscious. And the only way they can do that is if they disclose. And as you can see, there's a lot of companies voluntarily moving towards science-based targets and, reporting on those voluntary mandates. And of course, then it obviously puts them in a much better position when these frameworks become mandatory.
And I just want to add one thing, right? So it's not just kind of the regulations, right? It's really also kind of the market, right? It's the end consumer who looks at more sustainable products. And the first time I got involved with a years ago now, the first project I did in sustainability was that an ingredient supplier came to us because their customer, which was a corporation, right, was asking them for their carbon footprint because they wanted to include that into their carbon footprint calculation, right? So the pressure is really coming from the customers on the market, whether it's end consumer or corporate customers, and so companies should really look at that and not just at the regulatory requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a lot of incentives that and also what is the thing that if you cannot reduce unless you measure, right?
Yes.
This was evidenced in the early 1990s when the EPA designed some programs around disclosure, and then of course we know the famous book by John Doerr on what you can't measure, you can't reduce, right? And that goes all the way for sustainability. And it's only here then when you can measure that you can innovate, because you can see problem areas and say, hey, can we do a better way of making this product? So it's good because I think companies have these incentives to disclose. So we've talked about the US. We've talked about the kind of the regulatory push for disclosure, definitely in the case of Europe. How about other countries? Do you see more demand for SAP products from, for example, from India or from other players that are big contributors to the sustainability? footprint.
So
Yes.
the whole sustainable topic is not a European and or US kind
Yeah.
of topic, right? It is a global topic, and if you look at so that's also why we are basically positioning our products globally, right, and not
Hmm.
just in the US and North America,
Yeah.
and we see adoption also globally for those products. From a regulatory perspective, it's the same thing, right? So we have BSRS. I'm not exactly sure if they have the
Yes.
right
Yeah.
acronym in India.
Yeah.
We have the Green Credit Program in India recently introduced. We have in China. We have three major stock exchanges
Hmm.
have recently introduced sustainability reporting requirements for corporations who are listed in those stock exchanges.
Yeah.
There's also a push in China to have a China-wide sustainability reporting requirements based on ISSB. We
Hmm.
see in Japan, right, big market as well, like that they
Yeah.
also starting to adopt ISSB as one and as two. So it's basically APJ, right? We see that there as well in all of the different bigger markets. Same thing in Latin America, right?
Hmm.
So talking to our Latin America uh, colleagues,
Yeah.
we see a lot of demand there. For instance, in topics like green token, like what we talked earlier, right? Because of
Yeah.
a lot of these products are coming from Latin America. Just think of coffee, right?
Yeah.
Certified organic coffee. So I buy certified organic coffee, and I want to make sure that it is certified organic coffee,
That's
and it's not just
correct.
1% certified organic coffee.
Yeah.
So you see this there, and we see a demand there as well in Latin America for our solutions. So I think sustainability is a broader, it's a global thing. We might have certain regions who are a little bit further ahead,
Hmm.
and because of regulatory push there, and that's mainly kind of in Europe there right now. But we
Hmm.
see also the regulatory environments, adopting and globally in most of the countries. Yeah.
Okay. So things are looking good in terms of awareness and in terms of interest from the
Yeah, and
companies.
any company who has a global business, right, will be subject to it, right, and that's independent of any kind of a local,
Yeah.
SEC regulations or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. And I think one thing that I also want to get your assessment, we've talked about Fortune 500 companies. What is the interest from, startings and startups, for example? Um, are they thinking about these? Do they have the resources? Uh, the smaller, the
Yeah.
mid-sized, and the smaller companies, what is the level of interest in terms of their, you know I know, I mean, they get a lot of regulatory, what is the word, time to report these things,
Yeah.
but are they doing it, as inclusive of a strategy, or just wait and see? Yeah.
So I would say, so first of all, SAP, although we are known for, serving all kind of the big corporations, we also
Yeah.
kind of, sell our products and support like smaller and mid-sized companies.
Hmm.
So therefore we also see kind of the same kind of requirements there. I think it's
Yeah.
often like a mistake to assume that smaller companies don't have the same requirements as the big ones have. They just don't have maybe the same visibility.
Yeah.
But if you look at across all the different small companies, then the market is obviously way bigger. So
Hmm.
from a startup perspective, well, there are two aspects, right? So first of all, there are tons of startups out there who are actually directly addressing sustainability topics,
Yeah.
right? So I'm kind of working out sometimes there in the with the German startup accelerator here in Palo Alto, and we see a lot of startups who have a sustainability goal, right? So they
The
support
core.
certain sustainability topics. But then,
Yeah.
even if you look at startups who have a different business goal, I think for them, it's almost a little bit easier for them to build in sustainability right from the start,
Yeah.
rather than going back and trying to build it in after the fact, where
Yeah.
they have, established processes in place, maybe where they have some resistance, organizational resistance. So it's really important that it gets that sustainability gets really supported from the leadership perspective. So if that is not the case, then there might be more difficulties in bigger companies to do that. And now smaller companies, and even startups, they have the chance to really start sustainable from the beginning, right? So
Yeah.
that's really a huge asset they have, that they can do that.
Okay. One question that I wanted to ask, and I think maybe it's incorporated already in the tools that you have, is how is AI going to be more included in your tools, and is it already being done so? Uh,
So there's no conversation these days, right, without AI,
yes,
particularly Gen AI,
exactly.
right?
So it has to be
So and
the
that's
primary.
the important part, right? And we are really looking into how can we improve our processes using AI, whether it's generative AI or more classic AI, depending on the use case, right? So we use the term business AI, right, where we
Mhm.
really want to improve the business processes and very often individual steps in the business processes. So it's not necessary that, hey, I switch on something and now everything works automatically. It's really often like very specific steps which help improve efficiency for end users, right? So
Yeah.
so that also is also true for our sustainability solutions, right? So we are constantly looking into where can we improve the business processes for a sustainability manager. For
Hmm.
instance, someone who we talked about the disclosure document, right?
Yeah.
These days, one thing is to collect all the data, but then the other thing is to create the disclosure document. It's a lot of work,
Hmm.
which company have to do. Can you use
Yeah.
Gen AI to basically help generating the disclosure document based on your actual data? So that's
Hmm.
something which we have put in place there, where
Okay.
we help, where we have all the data available in the control tower, right?
Hmm.
And now we are able to use Gen AI to really kind of create at least the first version. Needs to be validated then, but create the first version of a sustainability report just using Gen AI.
Okay.
But also when we look at the data, when we look at calculation of the data, there's often kind of a lot of nitty-gritty kind of work which needs to be done to really kind of validate the data, map the data. And one example is basically the mapping of emission factors, right,
Yeah.
to materials. It's companies often use emission databases, LCA databases where they get get a lot of carbon equivalent data, emission data, but now they have to map that to their actual products. And
Mm.
there could be a lot of attributes they have to do. There might be on the description, which they have of their products. So how do they map that? And we did in the early days of sustainability, there was a pain point, right? So we had the customers really spending a lot of time to create this mapping. Now with AI, we also have a version there which basically helps for this mapping, right? Which really helps to create this mapping very fast. There might still be some review, so the tool will give you some probability that this mapping is correct. And if it's 99% correct, then you're probably okay with it. If it only
Yeah.
says 85% correct, you might want to look at it.
Yeah.
But it takes away, most of the manual work and allows you to really only focus on those where there's a question mark.
Okay.
So these kind of productivity
Hmm.
tools, let's call it this way, we see kind of across the board in many of the SAP solutions across all of the different solutions, including also the sustainability solutions. And we are continue doing, innovating on that, finding new use cases where we can use Gen AI or AI in general
Hmm.
to have our end users become more productive.
Yeah. So I saw that you guys, your tool helps calculate more the actual emission factors as opposed to the averages. Is that a part and parcel of the AI, or is it part and parcel of the cloud? Uh,
So, so first of all, yes, you're right. So we want to help customers to move from average to actuals, right? So the greenhouse gas protocol allows for both, so it is compliant, but it
yeah.
has been shown that averages or spend, often also kind of spend based calculation of emission factors are kind of very inaccurate. So therefore, we really want to make sure that we are working with actual data as much as possible. And that is kind of in multiple ways. That is on the one hand side by measuring actual energy consumption at the asset, at the resource level, and including that in the calculation. But it's also kind of to get ideally direct emission factors from suppliers who I'm buying from in a standardized way. So that means that that we have a network solution in place, right, called Sustainability Data Exchange, which helps suppliers to report the carbon footprint of their products to their customers in a standardized way based on the PACT standard, which was defined by the World Business Council of Sustainable Development. But also importantly, to only kind of basically report that once. They still have control who is allowed to see it, but they will always report the same numbers, and they will just kind of have that once in a standardized way and don't have to log on to 100 different web pages with different formats and fill out different Excel spreadsheets, right? So there's one standard, and they just have to report that, which should really kind of not only help to make to have less work, but also helps with the accuracy and auditability of those data. Really getting the actuals from the primary source rather than working with averages. That will not always work, right? Not all the suppliers are ready for that. So there will be for quite some time we will have fallback solutions, right? Whether these are LCA databases or even only spend-based data. But ideally, what we try to help customers to really kind of move to using actuals in terms of rather than just averages. Yeah.
Okay.
So the cloud helps there, right, in the sense of the network solution, right, where suppliers can basically log onto the cloud and through in the network and then publish their data. So that's definitely kind of an enabler for it.
Yeah. Okay. I keep saying one more question. Okay, so one more question is there a lot of interest right now from companies towards like buying carbon certificates, sort of in the voluntary carbon markets? Is that something that you're seeing much more right now? Offsets. I'm talking about offsets. Basically.
Yeah, obviously, right. So I think offsets is probably in every company's strategy right now to reduce their carbon footprint, right? Long term, we obviously, in order to become to net zero, then they also want to reduce that, right? Or definitely. But at this point in time, right, I think for almost all companies, buying offsets is part of their strategy. Now, it's as important that they buy offsets which are kind of real. And I think also here, California had, with lots of people, we look into these 2G regulations, which are about carbon reporting and risk reporting. But there's a third one, which I don't have the exact number right now in my head, but which is really also looks into the carbon offsets and making sure that those are justified, right? There's something behind it. And I think we have similar regulations in Europe. I think that's important, right? Making sure to buy you look at the right certificates, look at the right offsets, so that those claims can be justified and hold any kind of audit. But and then going forward, the strategy, that's again where it's important to, when we talk about making the business process sustainable, right? So reducing the carbon footprint in the business process so that we can get away from the offsets. But at this point, I think it's part of any company strategy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, is there any particular thing that you want to address that we haven't covered so far?
Well, first of all, thanks, Seema, right, for having me at the podcast. I think the message which I would like to give to the audience, right, start now, right? Don't wait. I mentioned some of the regulations which are coming on the EPR side in the US here, but also kind of on the climate side. it is really important that we start now, that we don't lose against our competition, who might start now and might gain a competitive edge in the market if they can show that they are more sustainable than we are. So we as a corporation, SAP, did that in our industry. I'm looking forward to working with all other companies in the world to do the same.
Okay. Well, that's 3 on 3 for me for agreeing with all my podcast guests so far. I agree with you. So I think it's been great having you on the show. And let me just mention that this is not a sponsored podcast. It's my curiosity that's driving it in terms of learning how the solutions are there for companies to become more sustainable. I know we entered into a lot of jargon, Christian. So maybe I want to promise some of the new people who are just getting into the field of sustainability that I will have a podcast on some of the background that we discussed here. But nevertheless, I think it's appropriate for all companies that are looking to engage in these efforts. So thank you very much, and it's been a great pleasure. And we'll chat again.
Thank you, Seema. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
listening,
Thank you.
everyone. Thanks,
All right.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.